Yeah, one of my favorite stories later on is when we built MarginEdge, and one of my favorite restaurateurs here, Greg Caston, owns a few restaurants. One of them's Tony and Joe's in Georgetown, and we built the theoreticals. You could see what you actually sold versus your theoreticals, and we put his sea bass in first. It was literally the first time we ever did a theoretical, and he only makes it on one dish, so it was super easy. How many ounces of sea bass are supposed to go on a dish, and what's the button in the POS, and you map the two together. And he was using 25% more sea bass than he should be using, and then he flipped out. He was literally, every time he sold sea bass, he was losing money every time somebody bought that dish. And he went into the kitchen, and he had a fish cutter who had been with him forever. He was just cutting the fish too wide. It was just that. It's not that hard to put a few extra ounces on a piece of fish.
But what caused him to go look?
My theoretical. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
He looked in MarginEdge. Yeah, I mean,
until you have the numbers, you don't know where to start looking.
And that's not something you could know without software. You just couldn't. I mean, technically you could, but the work would be brutal.
Yeah, it's not realistic with all the other variables that a restaurateur has to be on top of.
This episode is brought to you by Restaurant Systems Pro.
With excitement, allow me to introduce to you today's guest, co-founder and CEO of MarginEdge, Bo Davis. My man, Bo, are you feeling unstoppable today?
I am feeling unstoppable. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Dude, I'm excited to be here, and I want to publicly just thank you and MarginEdge for all of your support over the years. I want to say you've been supporting the podcast going back before 2020, like
awesome.
2018, I think is the first time we started talking. So thank you for all of your support. Yeah, man. It's great to be able to sit here across the table from you and to share your story, not only as a tech entrepreneur, but as a restaurateur. You have a really incredible story from dropout to tech startup to, I think you've done a lot of volunteer work too. I'm really excited to get into this, man. But let's get that motivation.
It's a little bit of a random walk, I'm afraid.
Yeah, dude, I love random. Let's get that motivational, inspirational ball rolling with a success quote or mantra. What do you got for us?
All right. So I studied philosophy as an undergrad, so I'd like to go a little bit deep. And for me, this is not necessarily a success mantra, but it is absolutely a life mantra. And it's if you walk over to my office, it's printed on the wall over my desk in very big characters. And it is, "The unexamined life is not worth living." It's a quote by Socrates. And the heart of it to me is, we go through our day to day and we're usually in autopilot, right? We're doing things day to day and just making decisions the same way we made them a few minutes before. And the unexamined life is not worth living tells me that I need to stop every once in a while, particularly when the big decisions are happening, and really think about, what does it mean? What does it mean? And that's what separates us from animals. That's what makes us human, is that consciousness. So, it's the road less traveled. It's the true to yourself. It's the unexamined life is not worth living.
When did you figure this out? How long into your journey?
So early. I was inspired by Plato when I first started college. I read The Republic, and it was a book that blew my mind and inspired me to study philosophy in my undergrad. And really, it's been central to how I've thought about the world ever since.
I think I'm just starting to realize this as I roll into my early 30s or mid 30s. I started to realize you got to slow down to speed up. And I think as a restaurateur, we're guilty of this a lot because you're working 80, 90 hours a week. You don't have time to slow down until you get to that point. You have to eventually slow down, choose to unplug for a little bit or slow down so you can work on the business and not in it, right? I don't think you can do both, or you just have to maybe put in a...
Yeah, and I think that's true for yourself too, even if it's not restaurants, right? It's just life, right? Life is busy, whether you're a parent, whether you're working in the restaurant business or in other industries, you're in a rush, you're doing things, you're trying to get something done, you're focused. And I think the life goes very quickly like that. Right. And if you don't take a minute and stop and think about what you're doing and are you really making the decisions that are going to get you where you want to be, it's easy to just keep doing the same stuff over and over and over again.
I love it, man. Great way to get this thing started. And take us to the beginning. Where does it make sense to start sharing your story?
It's funny you mentioned dropout. So yeah, I had a sort of non-traditional beginning in my career for a technology entrepreneur, I guess. I think about the dropout stories of Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and people who were too smart for their schools. Apparently, I was not that. I failed 7th grade. I failed 11th grade. I got in a lot of trouble and had to find another route, and so I dropped out early and went into community college, and then did a couple of years of that and transferred to a local university and then to GW. But I had a fairly rough early beginning, but I think that's part of what gives me that sort of that desire to work really hard and to focus and this be thoughtful about what the decisions are that I make.
What was the struggle for you?
I'm sorry, say it again?
What was the struggle for you? I mean, you said you failed out. What was the struggle?
Drugs.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's a thing, right? As a teenager, I went off the rails a little bit. We can leave it at that. But I got in a lot of trouble and found myself in a position where, like, the only way I was going to really get on the straight and narrow is if I changed everything, like everything, my school, my friends, my life. And you know, I had to make that decision early on. I actually haven't had a sip of alcohol now in 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Not quite 30, 28 years, something like that, but a long, long time. So yeah, I made that decision a long time ago.
I am kind of curious. Do you think your exposure to drugs and alcohol opened your eyes to philosophy? Did you think it expanded your mind at all? And maybe not good for like the organized school system structure discipline, but do you think that it maybe gave you different perspective?
Yeah, I don't know if the drugs and alcohol
trying to encourage people.
Yeah, no worries. I don't know that it gave me that perspective, or that I had a hard time staying on path, and that was a way to sort of, you know, experiment and see things differently and live a little bit differently. I'm not sure. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it is not the most productive way to accomplish that. You know, there are more controlled things these days with microdosing I read about in Silicon Valley and stuff, and that stuff is probably much better and more controlled and in smaller portions. What I was doing was not something I would recommend.
That is kind of one of the cool things about legalizing everything, is that I think it encourages, or it enables us to do it in a way that is safer, where we know what we're putting into our bodies. We know exactly to the milligram, you know, so like it's safer in that sense.
Well, it's also, I'm a huge believer in decriminalizing of all of this stuff. I mean, criminalizing drug abuse is like, it's just crazy. People who are obviously not making the best decisions in their life then being treated like criminals instead of people who have addictions and need help. Is, you know, it's bad for society. It's bad for the individual. We could probably talk about that for a long time.
Yeah, I'm going to a rabbit hole. I think we're only like 8 minutes into the conversation. So
yeah, I'm still 17, just for the record in this story.
So you run into drugs and alcohol early. It causes challenges for you as a young man. Eventually, you get out of it, though. I mean, you have 2 masters, right? So
I do.
At what point? What was the tipping point for you? Like, what caused the tipping point?
Well, you know, a judge that threatened to put me in jail. Drug rehab, that sort of stuff is where I turned. But basically, I realized that if I wanted to do things, you know, it's funny. It actually goes to the Socrates quote: "If I wanted my life to be different, I needed to do different things." And that sounds awfully obvious. But when we look around, we realize we all live on patterns, and particularly when you have a drug problem or, you know, any kind of emotional distress, you tend to repeat unhealthy patterns over and over. And so the realization that I needed to do something different was actually difficult and fairly profound. And I had my bottom, as they talk about, I walked away from it and started a new life and went into community college and started in the English 001, the lowest possible class the community college offered. And it took a couple of years before I could even transfer to another school and work my way up. But it took me 6 years, and I got my undergraduate. I ended up graduating from GW, and 6 years later.
What is GW?
George Washington University.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it must be. That's right here in Washington. Right?
Yeah, that's what brought me here.
Right. So what changed in you? I mean, you had this like fear of like what the judge put this fear in you, right? If I screw up again, then I'm going to be in trouble. But did something else change internally?
Yeah, I mean, something internally snapped, right? Like, the fear was deeper than the judge. The fear was that there was not a path out of my current lifestyle that was tenable. That was something that I could come to terms with, right? I was on a path that was very, very destructive. I had been thrown out of multiple schools, and I mean, I had been down a nasty road, and so. And I was still very young, but I looked around and like there just was nowhere to go. And so I knew that if I wanted to get on a different path, I had to make a clean break. And so I, started in the 12-step programs and did the whole thing. And like I said, left school and restarted.
So any key pivotal transformative experiences through school before graduating and launching your first business in 1997?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I think about, and it actually ties to that book, The Republic. I read that while I was still in community college, and I had read almost nothing, right, my whole life, and I picked that up randomly in a bookstore because I was like, I need to read something old. I don't know, I haven't read anything, so I need to start with something old. And
is that an audiobook? Do you know?
The Republic? I'm sure it is.
It's not read by the author though,
huh? Probably not. anyway, so yeah, I read that and it blew my mind. And as I went into college and started studying, I felt like I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. My mom was an entrepreneur. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. And I had always thought that. And I started in business classes, and I was looking around and realizing that everybody was studying the same thing. And at that point, it was mid-90s. Everybody wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I was like, well, if I want to do something different and start something, I need to do something different, right? Like, I can't sit here with a bunch of people in the same classes saying I'm going to do something different. And so I looked around the school, and I had read The Republic and been inspired by it. And I went to my first philosophy class, and I'll never forget, the professor wrote on the board, Philos Sophos, which is the breakdown of the word, and it means love of wisdom. And I was like, sweet. If I got to study something, why don't I study wisdom?
Wow. I mean, I feel like that's exactly what I do with this podcast too. Yeah. It's really about just taking these giants, giving them a platform to stand on, to pay it forward. You know, like, what's that saying? We all stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, there's power in that. So why was that so appealing to you?
Well, like I said, I wanted to go to the roots. I knew if I wanted to start a business and do something new and interesting, then I had to have different perspectives than other people, right? If I did the same thing everybody else did, I'd have the same thoughts everybody else had. And so I just wanted to mix it up. And so I started studying philosophy, but I luckily, philosophy didn't pay. So I got a job at the university writing code, basically developing web applications for professors. And this was 1995, which was before that was a thing. And back then it was a big deal that I could do that. And so they paid kind of a ridiculous amount. And so I was doing that, and I worked my way, all 6 years, I worked my way through school. And so at the end of it, I had learned a lot about how faculty members interacted with technology and what it took to get them online. And so that was my first company, basically. Right out of college, I started a company called Prometheus, which was an educational software company to help faculty online.
I was wondering if you were an aliens nerd. Like the movie Aliens?
No, I don't even know it. No, this is Greek. This is Greek philosophy. No, I don't even know. Is there a science fiction? I'm sure there is. There's probably a bunch of science fiction references.
But I am kind of curious, because you said that the appeal to you with studying this philosophy was going back to the roots, right? And studying the root. What did you learn about the roots?
Well, I mean, I think what's awesome about philosophy, and there are other fields, obviously, as well, that are similar, but what's awesome about philosophy is that it teaches you to think. It teaches you to argue. It teaches you to dissect information. And to me, that's what I mean by the roots. Like, to this day, like, what do? I mean, I analyze information that I get, and I try to make decisions, and I try to be smart about it. And I just feel like philosophy is phenomenal training for thinking. I mean, love of wisdom, right? Like, what it's literally the study of thought, and it's some of the greatest thinkers of all time, right? Whether it's Kant and Kierkegaard or Socrates and whatever. Like, it's, I don't know.
Do you ever find yourself finding or bumping into contradicting advice?
Oh gosh,
isn't that the most frustrating thing?
No, I actually like it. No, that's actually my favorite.
Why?
I find when everyone agrees, I'm very concerned, and I think when you find conflicting advice or conflicting philosophies or conflicting structures, that's where you find truth, because it's somewhere in there, right? Like, it's I look for things like that. Like I talk about it all the time. Like, with raising kids, if I ask you about your life and what's the most important things that have happened in your life, you're going to point to the difficulties in your life.
Right.
But then you raise your children and you try to keep them from difficulties, right? Like, what the heck? That's the contrast. Those are the contradictions in life that I find the most interesting.
It's weird, because I think as it's in human nature to bring order to things, right? Like, that's what we do. We try to organize things.
Sure.
We try to make sense of the world around us, and we try to construct it in a way that's easy to process. But I think we forget that the world is just chaos. It's
hard to get your head around,
right? No
I am actually of the belief that there is order. We just haven't been able to figure it out yet.
I think there's both. Can't you make the argument that there's both? I mean, isn't that
and you can certainly argue also that there's order, but we have no ability to comprehend it. So does that mean there's really order, right? So
exactly. Yeah. This is good. I'm liking this. So you study the past. How did the past?
I'll give you another conflict, right? So I was in university. I was doing this web development for professors, and it wasn't called Prometheus yet, but I was starting to automate it and starting to build towards software. And so I met with the professor at GW. I won't call people out. It's been a long time, but he was the professor of databases and internet technology, which was exactly what I was doing. And I said, hey, I have this thing, and I can automate all this work I'm doing for the professors. And this was like 95 or 96. And he looked me dead in the eye, and he's like, there is no way that you can standardize what professors do so that you can automate this process. And I was like, huh. Right? I love it. It's the exact opposite of what I thought. And so I went out and I did it. Right. And not just me, others. Right. And and it wasn't just about proving them wrong. It's like, you can't just trust the experts. You have to have different points of view. You have to have experience and be open-minded and be willing to test assumptions and not just take a book at its cover.
Right, for sure. So I'm assuming that this conversation, this inspiration kind of is what led into Prometheus for you.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing it and I wouldn't say it inspired me as much as I found it amusing, because that was something I got to reference for years later, but I would have done it anyway. But yeah, the Prometheus basically was a product that I started on campus at GW, got a bunch of faculty using it, got a bunch of students using it, they dug it, and then licensed it to Vanderbilt. I must have been 21 years old or something. I was young. But then actually got the university to invest in scaling it up. And so GW invested out of their endowment, which was the first time they'd ever done that at that point. I was like a 21, 22-year-old kid. It was like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and it was not because I was particularly smart. It was because the economy in 96, 97 was like everyone wanted to find the next internet thing, right? And no one knew what it was because it was all so immature. I mean, so this is years before Google and Amazon. Right. Yeah, this is before the bubble even really got going. It was the early days. And so, yeah, the university wanted to be in something, and I had something, and so it lined up beautifully. We went out, we licensed it to Stanford, Wharton, Columbia, some of the top universities in the country. It was fun because I was a high school dropout. I barely graduated college. I had a 2.01. You need a 2.0 to get out of college. I had a 2.01, which I only had because I had a 197, and I had to go ask the chair of my department for a grade bump on a class that I'd finished 2 semesters earlier so he could get me out. And then I was out licensing software to like top tier universities, which is slightly ironic.
I think you kind of teased with telling the professor what you created, that you could basically not replace the professor, but
no,
standardize.
Yeah, publishing the professor's information. So basically, the early days of this stuff, and you mentioned earlier that you had used Blackboard, but the early days of the course management systems in the 90s were about publishing a syllabus, allowing threaded discussions, publishing grades, allowing for quizzes, right? A lot of the basic stuff now that you'd kind of roll your eyes at. But back then, like, nobody was doing it online. That was not a thing. Like, the internet was, we were in Netscape days, and most people won't even know what that means. And so that was a thing, and that's what we were licensing.
Cool. So 97 to 2002.
Yep.
So 5 years of being a tech startup.
Yep.
I'm sure you have tons of life lessons just from this first,
I made all the mistakes. I mean, I was a philosophy grad who had never worked for anybody, who raised money and started this thing, and just didn't know anything about software development on scale, didn't know anything about running a business or whatever. And so we got some great deals. We grew. We had a good exit. We sold to a company that was one of our competitors. But it was a terrific learning experience for sure.
What was the biggest learning experience for you?
Well, there were a bunch of things. One of them that was definitely a takeaway was that I needed to understand finance better, because I heard later when I got a master's in finance, one of the teachers said, people spend a lot of time working in a company, but they don't realize they make all their money negotiating their entry and their exit. And finance is all about negotiating your entry and your exit, right? Your relationship with your investors. And at 22 years old, I knew exactly nothing about that. And so, yeah, that was definitely a learning experience.
All right, I'm going to have to drill down deeper into this. So what advice can you give us for negotiating your entry and your exit?
Well, I mean, it certainly depends on the industry, right? I think with restaurants, it's super important that the relationship between you and your investors is not a handshake, that it is well documented, and that it is fair on both sides. One of the common structures that I've seen a lot, that I like a lot, is, and the percentages can vary, but 80-20, 70-30, where basically investors that are coming in get paid back first with a carried interest rate, and then they get a smaller percentage of the profits in the long term. And so that allows the early earnings to go to the investors so that they're protected and they're not getting killed. But the long-term profits still can stay. The majority of the long-term profits can still stay with the restaurant. I'm a big believer in that structure, but it really does depend on the industry. Certainly in the tech industry, that is not what those deals look like.
Where do you think restaurateurs go wrong in those early negotiations?
Leases. Leases are a big one, right? I mean, I think the number of restaurateurs that I've been friends with and have known that have signed leases that are completely in their own signature is just scary. And the downside of those leases often are, 10-year leases with really meaningful rents. And so, you open a restaurant, you do everything you can, you work really hard, and sometimes it just doesn't work. I know I've had a good number of failures, which we'll talk about later. And it's one thing if it fails and it's a corporate shell. It's one thing if it fails and it's got, your money in it or friends and family, which is very, very hard. But it's another thing if it's your entire personal signature, right? And they can come after your home,
right,
and they can come after everything you own. And so setting up that lease, setting up the corporate structure, and even multi-units, I see this all the time, multi-units that don't set up subsidiaries. So even if they're all 100% owned by the parent, you really want each restaurant in a separate sub, so that if there's a slip and fall, if there's something bad happens that is beyond your control, your liability isn't the entire entity.
Cut off a limb versus lose the whole
shebang. So when I had 10 restaurants, we had each subsidiary had, when they signed leases, the parent would guarantee a portion of the lease, and that would be negotiated. And so we knew there was some liability on it, but the liability was capped. And when things went bad, which they did for us, and we had to close a bunch of restaurants, that capped liability is the difference between me being in bankruptcy and not, right? It's a big deal. And I think a lot of restaurateurs just don't know, and they go into it and they sign it because they think they have to. Yeah, and the landlords, in my experience, will always tell you that everyone does it this way, and they want your signature, and you'll never get a space if you don't do it, that kind of stuff.
Where does one go to learn more, aside from going to get a master's in the subject?
Well, we didn't cover any of that in my master's in finance. My master's in finance was more, investment banking, portfolio analysis.
Help you learn the language.
No, I think the restaurant stuff that I'm talking about is all about networking, at least in my experience, right? It's getting to know other restaurateurs. In my experience, restaurateurs want to help each other. People on the outside like to think that we're all in competition, when in reality, we're all in bed knowing how hard it is.
Right.
And we all do want to help each other.
I've picked up on a pattern that it's the most successful restaurateurs that are willing to share the information. It's weird. When I first started this podcast, I was terrified that I was crazy, that I could start a restaurant podcast, go to all these leading restaurateurs, and they're going to spill their guts.
Yeah.
Like, good luck, right? Yeah. Like, these guys are going to share their trade secrets. But there is definitely a pattern that the most successful restaurateurs are there because they're the most willing to give it. And that information, they develop a reputation where people know, go work for this person because you're going to learn. It's not just a paycheck. If you're serious about hospitality, they'll create opportunity for you. And
trust, right? People who are open and willing to communicate are the people that you're going to trust, whether you're doing business with them, working for them, or whatever.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned trust, because I feel like trust is like on the polar opposite of contract. Right. But I think you need both. So like, there's something to be said about trust.
It depends on, I think the devil's in the details on that one. Yeah. I mean, with investors, I think contracts are wildly important. You have to trust, but you need a contract. And what is the saying? Contracts keep trustworthy people honest or something like that. They're basically, the point is having a contract allows you to not have to worry about a lot of possible outcomes because you've predefined. So I'll tell you, like when I started my first restaurant in 2005, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I started it with two partners that I was in business school with and doing the master's in finance, and a lawyer, a banker, and myself. And one of the things the lawyer did,
that's a great team.
It sounds like a bad joke, actually. A lawyer, a banker, and a tech entrepreneur walk into a bar and decide to open one.
How many restaurants started like that?
It's a little scary. Where was I going? Oh, but the lawyer set it up in such a way that basically, it was very clear what happens if any of us decided not to stay in the organization, so that, we all trusted each other. And as people peeled off, there wasn't a big fight over who gets what, where, when, and how. It was all agreed.
I definitely lean in the direction of having a contract and having it spelled out. So if there's, over time, people forget what they say. You need to set it in line. You need to come back to something to hold people accountable to. Like, I'm 100% for contracts. But have you ever, Stephen R. Covey, right? Or Stephen Covey?
Sure. Yeah.
7 Habits. How
of course. Yeah.
His son wrote a book, The Speed of Trust, and this idea that like there is like, it's back to that contradicting advice, right? Like, have a contract. Be a trustworthy person.
Yeah.
And like the speed of just like, hey, like, I have integrity, you have integrity, I honor my word. Things can happen so much faster.
Oh, 100%. And the reality is, a contract, it is very rare that anyone's going to court over a contract, right? So even if you have a contract, if you don't have trust, there's very little you can get done. I completely agree.
It's not like
I've done a lot in my
trust.
No. I've done an awful lot in my career on stuff that didn't have contracts. I had a general contractor. The first couple were really hard, and then I found a company I really liked, and he built 6 restaurants for me around the country, and these were good sized projects, not huge, but good sized projects, and long story, but we ended up heading into a project. It was, $1 million project, and we didn't have time to do the contractual stuff. And he called me and he was like, we're starting and we don't have any paper on this. And I was like, yeah, I'm good for it. And he was like, all right, we're going. And like, he built me a restaurant without a contract. Like,
it happens all the time. I think
I'm not sure I'd recommend that, but it went.
Nobody recommends it, but we all do it. And I think the only place I have contracts right now as an operator in my business is with my sponsors, because I think that is probably the most official relationship I have, where like they make it happen. You know? So I mean, with my editor, we used to fling pizzas together. Like, we just trust each other. You know what I mean? But you cannot underplay the significance of a contract. I do want to dive deeper because I do think people in the restaurant industry, not in contracts, but this idea of negotiating. Sure. Because you spelled it out well, but I kind of want to like really slow it down and make sure we understood. Because people, when these restaurateurs, we're risk takers, right? We just go for it. We have our blinders on. Anything we need to do to get that place open. Yeah. And we know that we need to take risks to make it happen sometimes. But
maybe a little too confident sometimes. I know I fell into that.
Yeah. But back to that structure, you said 80, 20, 70, 30.
Yeah.
You said it kind of fast. I want to make sure we got it.
Yeah. So I would take a step back and say, essentially, depending on what you're trying to do as a restaurateur, I would put it in 2 buckets, right? There is I want to be Sweet Green, Cava, I want to build a growth concept where we're going to open a bunch of restaurants under one brand name. And in those investments, they actually do look more like technology investments, where your investors are buying equity in the company. There are no dividends. There's no anything. You negotiate a price. They buy 10%, put some money in. You use that to build restaurants, and then you go out and you raise more money and you build more restaurants, right? That's how Cava, Sweet Green, folks like that grow, because they're no dividends. They're growing it. They're just trying to build a company that they're either going to sell or take public. So that's one bucket, right? But that's not what most of us are doing. Most of us are doing, a neighborhood restaurant group kind of thing. We're going to have 10, 15, 25 restaurants. And in those, where each one is a different brand and you're really running it for the cash flow of that unit, then you can do a structure. The structure that I recommend is, I don't know, I'll just make up numbers. Say you need $1 million for the restaurant. And so you put in, $300,000 of your own money. You need another $700,000 in investment. You go out to investors and you say, look, for every dollar you give me, I'm going to give you 80% of the cash flow of the restaurant until you get your dollar back plus, 8% accruing per year, right? So you get your money back plus interest, basically first, with 80% of the cash flow. I'll keep 20% of the cash flow, so I have some upside in the early days. But once that $1 million is paid back, $1 million plus interest or whatever amount that you raised, then the numbers flip. Then I get, as the restaurateur, 80% of the profit, and you get 20% of the profit for your investment. The beauty of that is that instead of taking the same amount of money and saying, okay, it's 50-50 or something like that, the beauty of that is on the long tail in a successful restaurant, the restaurant owner stays motivated to make as much money out of that restaurant as possible. Right. And the investor is getting their initial risk capital back as early as possible, right? So for the investor, it's attractive because they're getting that money back. Yes, their upside is less because they're getting 20% back instead of maybe a higher percentage. But by getting their money early, a lot of them are more likely to do that, and it makes the investment, look, restaurant investments are dangerous, but it makes it safer than the alternative.
And that 80-20 split, we're talking about profit alone.
Yeah, just profit.
Would you recommend that there's a cash flow allocated for owner's pay on top of that, or is that 20% owner's pay?
I think a percentage for owner's pay makes total sense. And it really does depend if this is like a single unit and you're planning to be in there and running it day to day, or this is, your 10th unit and you're running a management company. The bigger groups will usually put a management fee, right? So they'll say 5% of the cash flow of the restaurant's going to flow to the management company, and we're going to provide services, right? We're going to do the accounting.
Yeah, I think restaurateurs get in trouble not factoring in their paycheck. Yeah. Right? There's your pay, and then there's profit.
Yeah. And certainly if you're in the restaurant running it, then for sure, you have to be paid, right? You got to eat.
Right. So I think we can move on. Thank you for breaking that down a little bit further. I'm sure there's a lot of people that got value from that. So you sold Prometheus to Blackboard. what's going through your mind right now? The year's 2002.
Yeah.
Are you
so
thinking I'm done, I'm retired?
No, so I didn't make what they call FU money, which is money to never have to work again. But I did very well for, I guess I was 20, what was it, 2002? 25? So I was 27.
27?
Yeah. Wow. So I was 27 years old. So, no, what I was thinking was, back to this point of trying to be conscious of what I was doing, right? So like, I had a gig at Blackboard that was paying a lot, right? They gave me a salary and a desk, and I could have stayed at Blackboard and continued to work in higher ed tech. But I took that moment during the acquisition and said, but is that really what I want? Or do I want to do something different, right? Do I want to experience more? I knew higher ed tech really well at that point. That's all I had done. And so I was like, no, actually at this point I just had a good run. I want to give back. And so I came home and talked to my fiance at the time and told her I really wanted to give back. And I literally was like, we should just go feed people in Africa or something. And she was like, well, I actually was thinking about the Peace Corps before we met. And so we looked into the Peace Corps together and decided to join. And so the two of us, we got married before we went, but we got married and went over into the Peace Corps for a couple of years to give back. And that was a pretty wild experience.
How did this experience influence who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the Peace Corps, and it's, for those who are not aware of the program, right, been around since the 60s, it's a 2-year and 3-month commitment where the United States government puts you in a developing country. You spend 3 months in intensive language training, living in a house that speaks no English, and then 2 years in a community where there are no other Americans and you're volunteering. So I was in a little town called Kriva Palanka in the corner of Macedonia, Serbia, and Bulgaria. Middle of nowhere in the Balkans, a little town of 20,000, and my wife was teaching English and I was doing economic development. And so I say all of that because the impact is that you get to see part of the world and experience a life that you literally just can't experience in the U.S., right? It's very eye-opening. The average household income is $300 a month, wow. But people are comfortable. Like, there aren't people starving, there's no homeless, there's no hungry, but they're also not rich, right? And so yeah, it's a pretty amazing experience. You learn a lot about life and yourself. And, a couple of things of my takeaways were, one, I thought, I worked really hard, right? Because I was an entrepreneur and started a tech company. And so I was like, yeah, I need a break. I need time off. And I got there and I was like, oh my God, no, this is way too slow. I went from flying a jet into a brick wall. Like, holy moly, you don't get a lot done in a town of 20,000 people. When there's no economy, it's hard to do economic development. Let me say that. So yeah, you have time to think, just seeing how the rest of the world lives, really.
So ultimately, 2 years and 3 months later, you're after hitting that brick wall, doing your service, giving your time. What was your frame of mind when you came back? Because there was definitely an itch.
Yeah, so I didn't come directly back. I basically, as that was starting to wind down, I was trying to think of what I wanted to do next. And I knew I wanted to start a business that was more hands-on, because I felt like one of the weird things about the software industry is, like, I never saw my users. Like, I had 250,000 students using my software, but I never saw anything, right? I was just in a room writing code. And so I wanted to do something more tangential. And so I applied to the top 5 schools of finance in the world, and one let me in. So I decided I'd go there.
This is after you have your master's in finance?
No, this was the master's in finance. Yeah. Okay. No, so while I was in the Peace Corps, I applied to a bunch of fancy schools, and only one let me in, at London Business School, and so that's where I went. And honestly, the only reason they let me in is they were a client, and so they actually knew me, and I was able to get a recommendation from the CTO. But as I mentioned, I had a 2.0 in philosophy in my undergrad, so my credentials weren't killing it in the academic department.
So you got in.
I did get in.
This is 2004?
Yep.
If I'm doing my math. So
I think that's right.
While going back to school for your master's, you're thinking, I'm going to open a restaurant.
Well, no. So I went to school for my master's and didn't know what the heck I was going to do. I was still trying to figure it out. And I made friends with, a number of people in school, and 2 gentlemen in particular. One was a lawyer, or one is a lawyer still, and one was a banker. And we hung out and we talked and we went to lunch and we talked about wanting to start a business. and we kept eating in a conveyor belt sushi restaurant in London. And at the time, there was a chain of conveyor belt sushi places called Yo Sushi that had been successful, raised private equity, had opened 40 or 50 restaurants in Europe.
Did they have one in Austin, Texas?
They had a few in the U.S. and they all failed and they left. Yeah, they opened about 15 in the U.S. about 10 years ago.
So Roy is one of these people, right?
What's that?
Is Roy?
No, I met Roy 10 years later.
Oh, okay, never mind. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So the three of us never worked in a restaurant in our lives. I mean, I was a dishwasher at 16 for a minute, but got fired for smoking too much pot. But we found this one restaurant, Itsu, that we really liked. And so long story short, we hired the executive chef and decided we were going to we wanted to be the Chipotle of sushi, right? At that time, Chipotle was blowing up and the idea of fast casual was on fire, right? It was 2005 and a bunch of concepts were starting to do that. And we were like, well, nobody's doing it in sushi and the conveyor belt concept's cool. And so we'll get this great chef and we'll bring him over and we will, open hundreds of these and be geniuses.
I never understood why the conveyor belt concept didn't take foothold over here. Like the way it does in other places. It's a great concept.
I'd like to think so.
I mean, I feel like traditionally, like you go to a sushi restaurant and it's not like you have a relationship with like the sushi chef. They're usually off in the corner. It's not like you're missing that element of things.
Right.
Like,
no, I'll tell you the lesson that I learned after spending a lot of time and money on this question is the reason conveyor belt sushi doesn't work in the U.S. is that it actually does work beautifully when you have the right demographic and the right foot traffic, but the demographic here is very sensitive. And so as the incomes go down, not dramatically, but as they go down.
When you say here, do you mean this market?
The United States of America. I opened restaurants in California, Boston, Texas, Florida, Virginia. I opened them all over and the same pattern held. We could open, like in Boston, we opened 2 restaurants, one in Natick that did very well. And it was, it's a high demographic. And then we opened one in Braintree, which, the South Shore Plaza is a very busy mall. It had 2.5 times the foot traffic of the Natick Mall where we had a restaurant. They're only 40 minutes apart, but it did 1/4 of the revenue. Can you imagine?
Really?
So we were hitting 1 in 10 people 40 minutes apart, and the only difference is the demographics. And they weren't like radically different, but they were different enough that I like to describe the sushi demographic as a cliff, right? It's as you get to a certain level of income, people just don't eat it.
I love sushi.
As do I.
I get guilty eating it sometimes, and the more I learn about what's going on with the fishing.
Have you done conveyor belt sushi?
I have in Austin, Texas.
Yeah,
and I really enjoyed the experience. Honestly, I thought it was fun. I like the idea of just like, I don't know. It's kind of too easy. It's like
that's what we liked about it.
Yeah, it's like you as the consumer, like you see this delicious piece of sushi going by. You might be full, but it's just like all I gotta do is just stop, and there it is.
That's what we loved about it. So the 3 of us were in London, which is not a cheap place to live, and we were eating at these places.
Actually, this is a teaser.
Okay,
this is the teaser. We're gonna take a break.
Sure.
To thank our sponsor, you. Thank you.
Oh, sweet.
I'm pretty sure you're on this ad.
Nice.
Thank you. And we'll be right back to talk about, we'll kind of unpackage the full picture of how you became a restaurateur. And I'm sure the story will come out of it.
We have to interrupt today's video to let you know that right now, Restaurant Systems Pro is offering a no strings attached 60-day trial that will help you improve your systems, increase your profit, and find better work-life balance. All you have to do is click the link below.
We are back, and you were just getting into the story of how you had this idea for conveyor belt sushi, I believe.
Yeah.
So take it from there.
Yeah. So the 3 of us were in London eating at these places, and one of the things that really inspired us was what you were just saying about how easy it is to just take another plate. And so you sit down, and as Americans, we just don't like to sit still that much. So as soon as we sit down, the food is there, and so you're consuming it. And
instant gratification.
Yeah, instant gratification. And you eat quite a bit of it because it's constantly coming by and you're done. And the average seating time is so fast. So our restaurant, we still have a place here in Tyson's Corner in Northern Virginia. That restaurant will seat 10 seatings in a Saturday. It's crazy. The average seating time is like 28 minutes.
That's crazy. Is there any data that supports the amount of sushi alone that people consume in one of these sittings versus traditional sushi?
Oh, that's a great question.
Because I would assume it'd be more.
Yeah, no, I don't know that specific answer, but yes, I'm sure it's more. There's no question. I mean, the reality is it's just there. So we make 75 different sushi plates, and so types of sushi. And so, yeah, as you sit there, there's just a constant parade of things going by. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what are When you first were having this conversation, when the idea is sparking, what was the appeal to you? What was why is this a good business? You already touched on some of the things.
Yeah, I think unlike probably I'm guessing most of the people that you speak to, it was not a deep desire to be in the restaurant business. So the three of us, none of us wanted to be chefs. None of us had food backgrounds. None of us had hospitality backgrounds. Like a banker, a lawyer, and a tech entrepreneur, right? So like, we were looking at it as a business. So we basically,
which is good. Yeah. I think if anything, that's where people who are restaurateurs or chefs or whatever, don't think about the business side of it. They think about the other, like the ego side of it or whatever, the passion. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. No. And we definitely came at it from a very different angle, for better and worse, right? Because there was a lot of stuff we didn't know that it would have been nice to know. But no, we looked at it very much like a business. So we pulled a lot of the data on restaurants in the United States and in Europe, and on conveyor belt sushi and private equity and what money people had raised, and all of that kind of stuff, and put together a business plan to open up restaurants in the U.S. and raised some friends and family money, put some money in ourselves, and opened our first place here in Washington D.C. in 2005.
Well, I would imagine one of the downsides of doing something like this is the initial investment. The build out of something like that, the probably not cheap.
No, it was expensive, and we didn't know what we didn't know. So we didn't know that like we should have been patient and held out to take a previous restaurant space and convert it, starting something that had never had a hood.
We could take over another conveyor belt sushi
concept? No. The conveyor belt's fine, but even like the hood. I mean, venting a restaurant space is expensive. We were downtown on 17th Street. We had to run a hood up an 11-story building, right?
What were you cooking that needed a hood with sushi?
Chicken teriyaki, right? I mean, you still have some cooked food. We still had a liquor license. We had sake and all that good stuff. And so,
knowing what you knew now, would you maybe would have like bypassed on the teriyaki and done just?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying about not knowing what we didn't know for sure. So like our place now in Northern Virginia, we use a hoodless oven because our chicken is like 3% of our sales. So is it the best chicken you've ever had? Definitely not. Right. But if 6 people sit down and one wants chicken, we can do it.
It's there,
right? Yeah. And so, but like 90% plus of the food is sushi. Yeah. Another thing, lost my train of thought. So we brought a chef over from London. That was one of the things I think we did do right. A chef by the name of Miguel Choi, who was really talented and did a great job. But we made a lot of mistakes. We had never done this before, so we brought him in.
Now, like, what were those big mistakes?
Oh man! So the number one mistake was we simply didn't have enough seats, and so we were packed at lunch, like line out the door.
How many seats?
36. Okay. 36 seats on a conveyor belt, but. Packed at lunch, but it was the CBD, the commercial business district, and so we were really busy, but for like an hour and 20 minutes,
so you needed to capitalize on that.
That's right. And so dinners were slow, weekends were dead, lunches were packed, and everyone thought we were printing money. And like, my friends would be like, "Oh my God, I saw the line of your place. You're killing it." We were in the Washington Post 3 times for our food, like all this great stuff, and we were losing money because there just weren't enough seats for an hour and 20 minutes. You couldn't do the revenue. Yeah. And so I mean, there were a few things like that were tough.
Well, I'm thinking like the cool thing about sushi is you probably could have. I mean, your people probably could have gotten there if you open at 11 o'clock for lunch. Get there at 9. Sushi has a pretty good shelf life.
Yeah.
So you could probably get there, pre-make a bunch of sushi.
No, that's right. And we did takeaway. So one of the things we pivoted to is we did a lot of takeaway out of the front of the restaurant, and so we did pre-prepared sushi out of refrigerators and chicken teriyaki bowls, that kind of thing, and I did a lot of revenue out of that space, out of that tiny, tiny space.
So volume, think about throughput, because you only have the seats and the time.
And specifically,
don't limit yourself to the real estate, right?
Yeah, specifically the time element of it, right? Yeah. We thought about the number of seats, but didn't really get our heads around. You only get 60, 70 minutes at lunch in a commercial business district area. So
the initial operating expense of the build out.
Yeah. We also underestimated just the amount of time it takes to find, sign, permit, build, and open. And when you have a fair amount of corporate overhead, because you want to open a bunch of restaurants, you can get clobbered on that, right? Because you have all this overhead, and it just takes a long time for the revenue to come in.
Where do you go to get an assembly or like a conveyor belt?
Yeah, there is a company in the United States that does it, but we brought all of ours in from England. There was a company in the UK that did all of the, Itsu was a brand there that we really liked. So we used the same company. They were phenomenal. So we would have the architects here do the design and send it over, and they would manufacture it to perfect element so that when it came in, it would fit.
You still have one location, 2 locations.
Just one. COVID killed and we're down to one now.
Okay, and that's in DC, right?
Northern Virginia, yeah, outside of DC, yeah.
Got it. Just around here. I was looking it up. Waabi, right?
That's right.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Any other lessons? Because you had
for the first restaurant, yeah. Oh no, I mean a lot more over the 10 years.
I
feel like
we barely scratched the surface.
Yeah. The biggest lesson I think we learned in the beginning, and this is very much plays into MarginEdge later, and that is just how hard it is to know your numbers. Like people talk about how restaurateurs may not know all of the costs.
This is coming from somebody with a master's in finance.
Yeah, no, what's funny is like, so when you think
you're
about
not alone.
No. When you think about my partners, right? Yeah. The lawyer was an M&A attorney that had worked on billion-dollar deals. The banker was an investment banker that had worked on all sorts of financial transactions. And after he left, Waabi was a consultant for McKinsey, one of the top consulting firms in the world, consulting with bank CFOs in Europe during the financial crisis. Super smart guy, really financially dialed in. And I also had a master's in finance. And so, we understood finance. The hard part is that, and we didn't recognize this when we got started, the hard part is the number of variables moving simultaneously. So you've got revenue changing every day that is very hard to predict. You've got, like Waabi literally has 800 different things that we buy. Each has a different price. You've got labor that you're trying to schedule. So you've got literally 60 or 70% of your spend is changing day to day, and your revenue is changing.
Changing hour by hour.
Yeah, and you're trying to hit a 10 to 15% profit margin if you're lucky, right? So you've got zero room for error. And so as finance people and data people, when we started the restaurant, we were really frustrated at our lack of visibility. And so that actually, I'll tell you actually a funny story, that inspired what became MarginEdge. So at the time, the bank...
How far into the journey is this?
Like 2 months.
Okay.
No. So we opened our first restaurant. It took 8 or 9 months to open. But once it opened, it was immediately apparent to us that we did not have the kind of information that we wanted, right? And so, and I know it was less than 1 year, because where the story goes is that the banker is a German national. We're still friends. Actually, I was just visiting him a few weeks ago. So the banker was a German national. He had gotten an H-1B visa to come over with his family, but it was for the fiscal year starting on October 1st, and we had opened the restaurant like 5 months before that.
September. Congratulations on 8 years.
Oh, thank you.
As of this month.
And so so I was scanning invoices and sending them to him, and he was doing all the books, right? Because he was our CFO. And so he called me one day and said, "This is really dumb. I'm going to find a company in India that will type these invoices into the accounting system so I don't have to." And I was like, "Norman, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. Like, that's adding so much complexity to this. You should just be doing it." And he argued with me, and I still remember that conversation to the day, because we fought about it. And of course, he ended up doing it because that's what he wanted to do. That's fine.
I actually had this argument today, ironically.
Oh, really?
Yeah, with somebody. So I host Coffee with Eric, where it's basically people in our network. We can come, we just talk about whatever. I was like, I'm really excited to go have my conversation with the CEO of MarginEdge. And we started talking about how do you value the cost of doing it yourself?
Yeah.
Or outsourcing to streamline the process.
Yeah.
Right. And that's essentially what he was trying to do, was to outsource it to a virtual assistant. Or
no, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was no software, just outsourcing it to a virtual assistant is exactly the way to think about it. But he did it. And the funny part of the story is that, obviously it all evolved, but that became the beginning of MarginEdge 10 years later. And today we have 300 people in that office. We have 600 people overseas working for us, but 300 of them are in that office that I thought was a terrible idea. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
So I would say the number one thing we learned on opening was just how hard it was to track all that data and how to stay on top of it and to know what your numbers were so you could make intelligent decisions day to day.
But it's absolutely crucial that you do track the data and that you look at it every day, and you're constantly, like you said, there's constant variables. The prices on these things from your vendors are constantly changing.
That's right.
You need to go with the best price to increase your margins, but how can you possibly stay on top of all that?
And also just make sure you're breaking your fish down properly, right? If you're buying too much fish, too much tuna, because it's being broken down poorly and the bloodlines aren't being cut out right, or you're cutting your portion sizes too large, your 10% margin can disappear in a flash.
Right. So many variables.
So many.
And you don't know until you start drilling down.
And it's not saying they don't know because they're not paying attention or they don't care. It's because it is literally too much information. There are just too many variables. You cannot have all of that in your head.
It's interesting because I was just talking to Adriel Labarsky, who specializes in helping restaurants develop their corporate sustainability plan.
Nice.
But this is a big part of what you're talking about in sustainability and all these things. It's just when you start when you get access to the numbers and you start following the numbers, they'll lead you to these places. And
100%.
Like, you can gamify it and you can make it like the great game of business, just like you're encouraging, you're showing your numbers to your team on how to become more profitable. There's the carbon accounting, right, where your carbon footprint, but this leads to profitability because if you reduce waste,
that's right,
you're also saving money.
Absolutely. One of my favorite stories later on is when we built MarginEdge, and one of my favorite restaurateurs here, Greg Caston, owns a few restaurants. One of them's Tony and Joe's in Georgetown, and we built the theoreticals. You could see what you actually sold versus your theoreticals, and we put his sea bass in first. It was literally the first time we ever did a theoretical, and he only makes it on one dish, so it was super easy. How many ounces of sea bass are supposed to go on a dish, and what's the button in the POS, and you map the two together. And he was using 25% more sea bass than he should be using, and then he flipped out. He was literally, every time he sold sea bass, he was losing money every time somebody bought that dish. And he went into the kitchen and he had a fish cutter who had been with him forever. He was just cutting the fish too wide. It was just that. It's not that hard to put a few extra ounces on a piece of fish.
But what caused him to go look?
My theoretical. That's what I'm saying. Exactly. He looked in MarginEdge. Yeah, I mean, it's...
Until you have the numbers, you don't know where to start looking.
And that's not something you could know without software. You just couldn't. I mean, technically you could, but the work would be brutal.
Yeah. It's not realistic with all the other variables that a restaurateur has to be on top of. It all started where you're this is one of the reasons why I love interviewing restaurateurs who have non-traditional entries into the world of hospitality, because historically I feel like it's you go, you work in restaurants, you learn as much as you can from the people you work for, and then you go and you kind of like, you get the framing, like it's like it's like a stamp, like this is how you do it. Yeah. But you get people from different backgrounds with different perspectives who study philosophy, and they go, why are we doing it like this? That's what happens when you have a tech person, a master's in finance, and a lawyer. They go, wait a second. But you're seeing more and more engineers and entrepreneurs and tech startup people getting into this industry. And it's cool because we're turning the industry upside down. We're saying like we're taking like this 1905 business model that everyone kind of rinsed and repeated for 100 years. Right. Then all of a sudden, like overnight, people are like, "What? Why are we doing it?" And then when they find a solution to do it a better way, they build a business around it. Yeah. Like it's exactly what you did. That's a cool thing about this industry.
No, it's true. It's so easy to lose so much money in the industry as well. You learn a lot of empathy for how difficult it is to run these restaurants too. It is a lot harder than we thought before we got into it.
It's my side project to talk people out of opening restaurants.
Yeah, one of the things I was told early on is the best way to make $1 million in the restaurant industry is start with 2.
Right. So let's talk more about, because I do want to I feel like there's more to the story of Waabi. Right. Yep. So you start with one location. Within a couple months, you say, here's a better way to track all of this information.
Yeah, and that was just a thing. Like we did that just to make
that was just data entry.
Well, no. So basically that evolved over a few years. So it was data entry first, and then I had actually built Prometheus originally, and so I can code a little bit. And so I built a tool that would tie into our point of sale system and pull the sales data out, and also allow the managers to enter some other information like payroll. And so we were able to get like a running P&L in just for our own uses. So it was ugly, but it worked, right? There was no external use.
So MarginEdge was a thing of it started in essentially 2005 when you started your restaurant.
No. So MarginEdge really distinctly started in 2015.
Well, because that's what I thought. But it sounds like you were kind of developing it unintentionally over 10 years.
I would say I was working on the concept. I saw the problem, and we were doing some work to help us function as a business, right? We knew we needed live numbers, and so we built this thing that I hacked together that allowed us to get day-to-day numbers. But my focus was absolutely on the restaurant group, and this was not software that could be licensed or sold. So it wasn't really MarginEdge, but it was solving the...
You're building systems for your own
Yes,
restaurant.
Exactly. In the old days, we used to call that an intranet, but basically it was an internal system. And so, I went on to open a dozen Wasabi's around the country, and we did a couple of different versions of it.
So what was the evolution? Because with each location, you kind of probably fine-tuned, like you learn through.
Yeah, we actually had a pretty clear breaking point. So we did the first one was a conveyor belt sushi place right by the White House, 17th and K, and then small, more of a commercial business district area. The second and third places we tried true fast casual, so walk up to the counter, order, sushi's made for you, and you carry it out, no conveyor belt.
So why'd you change the model?
Because the first one was not working. Like I said, it was busy for like an hour and a half, but did not make money. And so we felt like the fast casual ones would be a lot cheaper to build, right? And
less
we were still
parts.
Yeah, and we were still in this idea that like we wanted to be the next Chipotle of sushi, and so we thought maybe something that looked more like sushi or Chipotle and functioned more like Chipotle.
That place in Colombia is Fusion Sushi. Do you ever follow their? So I think it's Fusion. Maybe never mind.
No, I don't know that.
That was their same
claim.
Idea.
Yeah. So actually, a bunch of people tried it. We all failed. Nobody has done a good job at it. The problem is sushi just doesn't lend itself to that. But we did. We opened 2 of those. I actually basically opened one a year. So 06, 07, and then in 08, I opened one in a mall. This is the one that's still open in Northern Virginia. So in a really large urban shopping mall that's one of the busiest. It's a top 10 mall in the country for foot traffic. So very busy urban mall. We put it in the dead center. So they literally were tearing out their fountains in the center of the mall. No walls between 2 escalators. 1,800 square feet, so a full-size restaurant. And we convinced them, which was hard. They actually flew a bunch of people out here from Santa Monica and looked at our restaurant and negotiated forever, but basically convinced them to let us put this thing, a floating sort of conveyor belt restaurant in the middle of their mall, and that killed. I mean, really killed.
All the foot traffic.
Oh, my God. And to this day, kills.
Even today with the mall setting.
Yeah, so we opened that in 2009. It's 23, so 14 years in, and the only down years were 20 and 21, right? 20 and 21, of course, were what they were, but it's just killed. Yeah, the thing with malls in America, as a quick side note, is that, yes, there are many dying malls, but there is a...
there's almost a resurgence happening.
Well, and specifically, there's a handful, probably 200, 250, that are consolidating. So basically, people are less likely to go to the second and third tier malls, which makes people more likely to go to the first tier mall. And
what do you mean by that? I'm not familiar with the tiers.
So if you just imagine, like, take this market in Northern Virginia, we had 3 or 4 malls that were very weak, and Tyson's was the strongest of those 3 or 4. So those others are all closing. And so all that foot traffic is consolidating around Tyson's Corner Mall. And so that mall is just busier and busier by the year,
unless you're in San Francisco.
Well, I don't know. The Westfield had a beautiful mall in San Francisco.
Yeah, but have you heard the horror stories? Yeah. Oh my goodness, man.
But anyway, so we opened that one, and the fun note on that one is it just so outperformed our expectations that we realized that was the model that we wanted to do.
Well, I think it's weird because as like there's this trend right now for these corporate America, like retailers to transition to more digital presence, online ordering, things like that.
Sure.
I think that you're seeing like a huge, like these malls for like, a solid 5 to 10 years, they were just kind of like empty, like no man's land. I'm thinking of like Fox Run Mall and like Portsmouth or Newington, New Hampshire, right? Yeah. But now what I'm noticing is that there's like this like kind of like it's being like upcycled almost, like the malls. Like,
they're trying. The term they're using is experiential. They're trying to become experiential properties. So they're trying to bring in things that make you want to go bowling or watch a movie or eat at a restaurant or something that is not just going to buy something you can buy online.
But it's cool because there's so much void, and I feel like opportunity for small. Like you're seeing a lot of like local operations going there. It's becoming a community of business where it's like it's kind of cool. It's almost like the shell of like this corporate America that failed, and like now like the community is moving into this shell and like taking over. Like in Newington, New Hampshire, they're doing like this car show.
Oh, cool.
They have like these old cars that come and like
nice.
It's like I don't know. It's just interesting to see how that is like transforming. I like it.
Yeah.
It's almost like creating opportunity for the next generation.
No, that's right. And then some of them are doing that. Some of them can't, and they're going to be torn down and turned into apartment buildings. And then they're the handful that are still really busy in traditional malls, like where we are. The Tyson's claim to fame, one of them is that mall gets more foot traffic than the busiest Smithsonian's. The Air and Space Museum in D.C. will get 20 million visitors, and Tyson's Mall will get 25 million visitors.
So as you're opening, you had up to 1.10 Wasabi's.
Not at one time, but over the years I opened and closed a dozen of them. Yeah.
how many of them were conveyor belt versus
all of them were
fast
conveyor
casual?
belt except the 2 fast casual we tried.
So
basically
2 out of 8 were fast casual.
2 out of 12.
Oh,
yes.
sorry, 2 out of 12.
So the Tyson's Mall model, that opening in a mall, was basically what we decided was the winning formula. And so we went and opened a bunch like that. So that's when I started going to other states, because there are only so many super regional malls in any given region, right? So that forced us to open really all over Orlando and Boston and Texas. And
I wonder sometimes, it's almost like you started that concept too early, because I feel like now finally there's like this movement towards automation that's starting to happen.
Well, yeah. So I can talk about that a little bit. We do use sushi robots, which is very cool. So there's a bunch of automation in the restaurant. And also there is a chain now that, called Kura Sushi, that is the first one that seems to be doing well as a conveyor belt sushi around the U.S.
What are they doing different?
Yeah, so we took what you could call the European model, which is basically the quality of the food is higher. It's more like the type of food you get in our restaurant is the same you would get in a high-end sushi restaurant. It's just served on a conveyor belt for display, right? What Kura does, they're actually a Japanese brand, Japanese company that is doing the traditional Japanese model, which is every plate is 100 yen is the Japanese model. Here I forget exactly the price, but every plate's the same price. It's inexpensive, and frankly the quality is not great, but that's like their thing, is like you can eat a lot of inexpensive sushi, and that model seems to be working quite well, and it's really quite different than what we were doing.
Got it. Anything we haven't discussed in terms of the evolution of your restaurant group? Ultimately, you said it was the pandemic that. Were you operating at how many restaurants before?
No, so the big hit that we took in Waabi was not. I wish I could blame it on the global pandemic. The global pandemic killed one of our restaurants. What killed more of them is that I got aggressive after having a couple of those that were working really well and trying to open a bunch of them. And I started going into malls where the demographic was a little bit lower, but I thought because of the foot traffic being high enough, we would be fine. And just the nature of these properties, they would take a couple of years between lease signing and opening. And so I had a pipeline of a good number of them. And so I opened a good number of them that were in demographics that didn't work. And it went through a very painful experience of opening restaurants that did terrible numbers, and then having to let everyone go and close the restaurant and deal with the landlords and all those nightmares.
Do you have any desire to bring it back? To go?
I will never open another restaurant. Okay, no, I'm done. No, this is the hardest thing on earth. Holy moly!
And this is coming from somebody who started 2 tech startups now.
Yeah,
who's
God.
Successful.
Tech startups are so much easier.
Souls, right? So I mean,
tech is so much easier.
I mean,
I have all the respect in the world for restaurant owners.
I mean, I kid, and I'm like, I started this podcast because I wanted to open a restaurant. And I wasn't in the position to open a restaurant. So I said, I'm going to make my life about learning as much as possible to serve enough other people who are in the position to open a restaurant.
That's awesome.
And hopefully if you serve, it will come back around some way, somehow.
Yeah.
After interviewing nearly 1,000 restaurateurs, I might have scared myself straight. I still have the desire, I'm not going to lie, but I'm not going to do it unless I have cash to burn, like you said, like $1 million to literally light and say, well, I tried, and a team of amazing people. I will say that the cash flow is increasing and that my network is increasing, and I do see myself partnering with people who could, like, but there's no way I'm doing this and starting a restaurant.
Right.
And I love what I do. You know what I mean? So like, why would I walk away from something that I spent 10 years growing?
Yeah. For a high risk venture.
But at the same time, like, I hope that for everyone out there who listens to this podcast, I'm sure there's a couple hundred that probably have listened to the majority of my interviews. And I'm hoping that they are kind of like maybe taking a few steps back. Like, I want to do this, but like, I'm going to do it right. You know, like, I'm going to put money aside, like, because it is hard, like, to your point.
No, it is hard. And I think if you have investors that are not betting their own farms and are, aware that they're taking a risk, then I think you can do it in a way that is less stressful. And I definitely would recommend that route rather than, again, putting your own name on the lease and everything you own into it, because it's risky. I mean, restaurants, you can operate them really well and increase your odds of success for sure, no question, but there's still a little bit of a lottery element in it.
For sure.
And the ones that do well, it's a little bit like crack, right? It's like, whoa, when they do well, they can really make money and be exciting, but man, they can lose money.
Right. So in 2015, paint the picture of where your life is.
Yeah. So 2012 through 2014, was that period where we opened restaurants that did not work, and it was very painful. And I was flying around the country having to close restaurants and really struggling. And I don't remember exactly, but I think in 2014 we still had 6 restaurants, but we were bleeding. The more of them were losing money than making money, and I was really, honestly, in a very difficult emotional place. It was not good. Like really, it was tough.
Can you get into it?
I don't mind. It's I think the best. I don't mind.
So like, I guess just paint the picture. Like, what were you feeling?
It was dark. So, imagine I had raised capital from friends and family, right? And I had raised capital, a little bit of like semi-professional money from an angel group down in Florida, but millions of dollars, and had opened restaurants, had opened a couple like the one in Northern Virginia that were killing it. I mean, really very successful restaurant. But on those exciting numbers, went out, signed a bunch of leases to open a bunch of restaurants. Now, I will say I had a board, and the board knew, and the investors knew. And so one of the things, that I like to talk about that's important to me is transparency, and I've always believed that. So I was extremely transparent. So I never at any point felt that I misled anybody. But you can't help but feel guilty when these restaurants start opening up. And like I said, this one in Boston is a perfect example. It opened up and did 1/4 of the sales 30 minutes away. Anyone that's been anywhere near a restaurant knows if you do 1/4 of your expectation, you are going to lose a lot of money every single day you open the doors. You will end the day with less money than you started every day. And because of the pipeline, there's a 2-year pipeline on these leases. I had 5 or 6 more restaurants that I had already signed leases and started to get permits and build. And every 90 days for a couple of years, I had a restaurant open all over the country. A couple of them were fine, but a few of them were just a nightmare. And so as the first one opened and went south, you're like, well, probably okay, these other ones. And another one opens and it's like, yeah, right. And so as that train wreck developed slowly, it got harder and harder. And you start, doing everything you can, right? You start paying vendors as late as you can get away with. You start using your credit card. You start doing whatever you can to make the bills and keep everything going, hoping that things will turn around. And we got
to... What was the breaking point? Said we got to. I think I cut you short.
Yeah. So, well, I don't know that I would call it a breaking point, but essentially what happened was I got to a place where I was struggling, and I was trying to talk to anyone I could and get advice and whatever. And so I reached out to this gentleman, Roy Phillips, who you mentioned earlier. Roy had been with the Outback Group for 25 years. He owned the rights, him and a partner, and the rights to the Bonefish Grill in the Mid-Atlantic, and had been a very successful restaurateur. I had met him in a totally random way a year or two earlier. But I just knew him as a, trustworthy guy, smart guy, been in the restaurant business a long time. And so I reached out to him and said, look, I'm in a bad spot. I need to talk to somebody. And he was like, sure, come on out. And when I went and met with him, I learned he had just sold his interest back to Bonefish, so he was free. And I was able to talk him into coming to help me look at the restaurant group and come in as a partner and give me a fresh set of eyes, because we were in a bad spot. And so, so he came in, we flew around the country, we looked at the restaurants, we looked at the P&Ls, and he really helped me realize that, like, you just can't throw good money after bad. Like, as much as you want to, because you've put so much of your time and money in it, you care about the people running the restaurants, and you care about the investors, you care about everything. It's just bleeding, and it was going to kill everything. And so we started pulling the plug and closing restaurants and, dealing with the lease issues. I mean, I ended up getting sued by a couple landlords and ended up in a court in Los Angeles over pigeon shit, believe it or not. That's a whole nother story. But yeah, went through a whole series of closing the restaurants that were doing poorly and cleaning it up, and at the end of that had 2 restaurants that were very strong, that were very cash flow positive. And one of the things I'm most proud of is there were no bankruptcies. So we ended up negotiating ourselves out of everything. All of the bank debt is being repaid and has been
masters
repaid.
in finance.
Yeah, I mean, I wish it was that. Honestly, a lot of it was just grit. I mean, a lot of it was me going to the banks. I mean, we had done an SBA loan for each restaurant. So each restaurant we did half an equity, half an SBA debt. And those loans were 5 to 7 year loans generally. And so we had, I don't remember, 7 of those outstanding or something, millions of dollars outstanding on those. And I had to call the bank and be like, look, here's the deal. You can bankrupt me and you can sell my house and that's it. Or you can stretch the term on those loans, right? You can give me more time to pay them back so that the cash flow month to month is lower, and I'm going to keep running these 2 restaurants that are profitable, and I'm going to keep sending you payments, and we're going to pay these things down. we are just now at the beginning of next year, we will just be paying off the last 4 of those SBA loans. And
congratulations.
It's 2024. Man. And that was 2014.
That must feel good, though.
I stretched them to 10-year terms. It feels wonderful.
But also, I think there's an underlying message there that, like, whatever the terms are, they're always negotiable.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, people want to get paid. And so, they recognize that you can't get blood out of a stone. And so, for me, and different people do it different ways, but for me, it was all about transparency. I put everything in front of them and said, look, that's what I got. This is the best I can do. Yeah. And you can tell me I can do better, but I can't. So
there is a silver lining to all this. From Waabi was born.
Yeah. So a true story. So we were doing this thing, right? And we were traveling around and closing restaurants. I was in a dark place. Actually, from the moment Roy joined, I started to feel better because at least I had somebody that I trusted. That was another set of eyes that I could rely on because I really was feeling bad about the mistakes that I had made. And
so he kind of convinced you to kind of accept your losses and to close the restaurants?
Yeah. And not even kind of directly. Like we looked at it and we were like, look, you gotta call it. Like if it's bleeding money, you gotta save the ones that are profitable. And yes, that meant hard things like breaking leases and negotiating with landlords and dealing with the banks and a lot of things that were difficult, letting people go, right? Flying into LA and letting go of the entire staff of the restaurant it's just awful. Awful. But it's the only thing that kept the successful ones open so that we could pay off the debt with the cash flow from those.
So what was going on with MarginEdge during all of this?
Well, there's no such thing. So
you were still using the idea of outsourcing.
Well, yeah. So we had in India, in this office in Chandigarh, we had, I want to say, 2 people who did the bookkeeping, and we had this product. I called it Argos, but it was this. I hacked it together. This. It was software, but it was, it wasn't 1% of what MarginEdge is, but it was conceptually that, right? People could type into it and see their numbers and stuff. And so I had that, and I had this team in India, and so basically, in the middle of all of this, Roy and I were talking, and Roy was like, you really have a mind for software. What he likes to say is actually his line was, you're in the wrong damn, he's an old Texan. He said, you're in the wrong damn business. You should be in the software business, not in restaurants. And so he and I went out and talked to some other restaurateurs about this idea of what MarginEdge became. And, restaurant management systems existed, right? Compete existed. There were restaurant management systems already. What made MarginEdge really unique is that we went out with a premise that no one would ever have to type in any information on any invoice ever. We would do it all. And no one had done that. And to this day, no one does that. There are people who help you with it and people who do parts of it. But to this day, we're still the only people that will take it end to end. And so we did. We went out and talked to people. And similar to the story I told about the internet professor, people were like, yeah, it's not going to work. And it's not going to work. The invoices are too complicated. Restaurants buy too many things. There's too much randomness in it. It's just not going to work. It's moving too quickly. All the things you might imagine. And Roy and I came back after a few of those meetings, and we were like, yeah, I think it'll work. I think we'll do it.
Well, also I think people are guilty. We are by nature linear thinkers.
Yes.
And we don't take into account that we live in an exponentially changing world.
Yes.
And what might be a limit today won't be a limit tomorrow.
That's right. It's the classic Henry Ford thing that if he asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Right. And that's right. And that's why we part of why we felt confident in it. And so we did. So January of 2015, Roy and I put some money in a pot and started MarginEdge with the idea that we were going to build, basically a restaurant management system, but one in which all of the data processing would be done by us.
There's also another name that we should mention, Brian Mills.
Yep.
So how did Brian Mills come into the mix?
Yeah.
Did you mention his name and I missed it?
I did not yet. Okay. No. So basically the way it started was Roy and I were with Waabi and we were talking about it. And
did you hire him?
Roy?
Was he working, or was he mentoring you, or like
I would call him a partner.
Okay.
So he had some equity stake when he came in, and he put up some money, had an equity stake, and was definitely also a mentor. I have learned an enormous amount from him over the years. We still work together, so I shouldn't use a past tense.
Was he just in your office?
He was. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought he was.
Yeah, that's right. No, Roy is a wonderful guy. I've learned a lot from him over the years. Yeah, hadn't met Brian yet. So basically, Roy and I, at the end of 2014, decided we were going to do this. We created the company, and then I reached out to some people I had known from the tech days, and there was a gentleman named Sam Lieber who also was a co-founder with us. He's not with us currently, but Sam was a CTO at another software startup, and Sam and Brian worked together at that startup. And so Sam and Brian came over as our tech co-founders, basically.
Got it.
So those two came in, and then also a gentleman by the name of Mike Spatalny, who's not with us now, but it sounds like people died when I said that, but they're all very healthy. They've just moved on to other things. Mike also co-founded with us in those days. And so, yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting about the startup of MarginEdge, and I'm really proud of, frankly, is that, you see a lot of people talk about minimum viable products, and you see a lot of people write software and build something that gets a little bit of usage, and they start shouting it from the mountaintops, and they go out and they raise money, and they try to grow the business when they've just started and they barely understand the problem, and they haven't spent a lot of time building a robust solution.
Whereas
where we did the opposite. So we spent 3.5 years with the development team in an office located right down the street from here. We had 5 developers for about 3 years.
So this is 2015 to 2018?
Yeah, and we just hammered on it. We had our only clients were basically friends of ours, so friends of Roy's or mine. So we had 20, 30, 40 restaurants using it. And we wrote a lot of code. And frankly, Roy and I were bored for a long time because we were both like, we're not, our modus operandi was, we are not going to go out and tell people about MarginEdge until we're proud of it.
We have to interrupt today's video to let you know that right now, Restaurant Systems Pro is offering a no strings attached 60-day trial that will help you improve your systems, increase your profit, and find better work-life balance. All you have to do is click the link below.
We're back, and so where we left off is that you shared the example that a lot of other startups will start with a minimal viable product, and they'll just launch and try to get users and scale and pivot and grow. But you really wanted to be slow, and you wanted to figure it out. You wanted to
well, yeah, I would say we knew the restaurant business.
Right.
Roy had opened, I forget the numbers, 25 restaurants. I had opened 12 restaurants. Between us, we had opened and operated restaurants, that were doing tens of millions of dollars in revenue cumulatively. So we'd done it between the two of us for like 40 years. Like
were the target market.
We really understood how to run a restaurant. There wasn't a lot of new information at that point for us, right? And so we wanted this product to meet that need, right? We knew what we wanted it to do. We did not need a minimum viable product to test and ask people what they did in their restaurant, right? Like we had a pretty good idea.
Right. So when you started with MarginEdge, you weren't quite using the camera technology yet.
No, we did.
So was that like the beginning of MarginEdge? Paint the picture of what the minimal viable product was, because you are much more today. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Of course, yeah. I mean, when we started, we had 5 developers for 3 years, and now we have 70. So yeah, we're doing a lot more stuff. But yeah, the I don't like the term minimum viable, so I'm not going to use that. But the early version of MarginEdge, just a pet peeve. The early version of MarginEdge, yes, you had. Your phone, you could take a picture of an invoice. We had a team in Chandigarh in India that would basically see that image and could type that information into our database, and we could then track the individual item costs and post that information into your accounting system.
So then it was a photo being sent to somebody who did the data entry for you.
That's right. And in V1, it was literally just a human looking at an image and typing that information directly in.
So you're basically creating a process around outsourcing it to somebody.
And if you look back in the 80s and 90s, big companies did BPO, business process outsourcing, and it was basically taking back office processes and moving them overseas. And small companies never could do that, right? You just can't.
Or I think at this point in 2015, a lot of restaurateurs just weren't thinking outsource.
Sure.
It just wasn't on their
radar.
And
outsourcing doesn't work for small businesses. You have to have a lot of infrastructure around it. And so you could think of what we were doing as basically automating that outsourcing.
Got it.
As the first value proposition that we were providing, right? You had to get your invoices into your accounting system. You had to get your sales data into your accounting system, and we did that for you.
Yeah, it was a solution for that problem.
That's right.
One problem that takes up a lot of time and is something that nobody likes to do.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So why don't you real quick, before getting into like any of the details, paint the picture of what MarginEdge Margin is today.
Sure.
In terms of the technology and what it is that you offer.
Sure. Yeah. So we are now in, I think something like 5,200 restaurants, and we're integrated with 50 or 60 point of sale systems. So that allows us to ingest everything that's happening in the restaurant from the point of sale, whether it's, every item that you sold, every substitute, everything. And then we have an app where you take pictures of invoices so we can capture the line item data of what you're buying. And again, it's everything you spend money on. So it could be your utility bill, it could be your liquor, it could be your food, anything. We do EDI integration, so we're pulling data directly from vendors. Also on everything you're spending money on.
What does EDI stand for?
It's stupid. It's electronic data interchange.
Okay.
It's just an old acronym, but basically, we receive the invoices electronically from the bigger vendors also. And then we tie into 15 accounting systems. So all of that data, all your sales, all your cost data is flowing into your accounting system. And so all of the data entry into your accounting is now done for you automatically. And then in the process, because we've captured all this, we know really everything. We know, how much you spent on avocados, how many chicken breasts you bought, how many hamburgers you sold, and we can do everything from recipe tracking to inventory tracking to order guide management to actuals versus theoreticals, right? How much ground beef did you buy? How many burgers did you sell? Are you wasting ground beef? All of it. And the beauty again is that you're not doing the data entry. You're not, so like when you're taking pictures of your produce and you're getting lettuce from different farms and it's coming in different SKUs, we not only capture the fact that you're buying lettuce, but we will relate the lettuce to each other, which is actually a big part of what we do, right? We get literally millions of SKUs, and we have a team of people stateside. So we have the overseas team that's now 600 people. We're processing 115,000 invoices a week. And we have the people overseas using machine learning and humans that get the data off of the invoices. But then we have a team stateside that are actually seeing every new SKU that comes into our database. There are something like 6,000 a day right now. Every SKU that comes in for the first time and saying, RD space TMT space 2/20 is a red tomato, right? It's a box of 2 20-pound whatever pack of red tomatoes. So they're relating it. So when you have a burger recipe with a tomato on it, your burger recipe is up to date. Your inventory pricing's up to date. You're not having to think about all of this.
I mean, that doesn't sound appealing. I don't know what does. I mean, to not have to track all that stuff. But and just to make it clear, today are you still out? Are there still people that? So I was for some reason under the impression that there's an artificial intelligence that you might be using now. That
we are.
So you take a photo and there's an intelligence that can read that photo.
It's both though. It's both. Yeah. So
what's that?
So machine learning has not gotten to the point where it can automate that process. Yeah. If anyone tells you that they can use machine learning to fully automate the process of invoices, they either have horrible quality or they're lying to you. Those are the only two possible outcomes. So what we do and what is popular is called human in the loop, right? Human in the loop means that basically when that invoice comes in, we run it through OCR, we run it through machine learning, we do a bunch of analysis on it, we compare it to our data set, et cetera, et cetera. Right. All of that's automated, but then it spits out to humans based on probabilities, right? So if there's handwriting on an invoice, and this happens 15% of the time, the invoices we get have tomatoes are scratched through it, right. Tomatoes are bad, bleach wasn't on the truck, whatever. That kind of stuff machine learning is terrible at, right? Because a lot of times it'll be just a line and then a 2, and you have to know, does that mean, right, whatever. So that stuff all gets output to humans, right? And so the term is human in the loop. So it's basically the invoices go through machine learning and then hit a human.
That does the heavy lifting.
Yeah, and at this point, every invoice that we process still has at least one set of human eyeballs before it's done. Every single one. So they go through machine learning, but they're just not perfect yet, these systems. And so, I mentioned in our early days, one person typed in the data. Now, if an invoice, even without the machine learning, an invoice will go through 4 stages with people doing different parts of it so that the data is overlapping and statistically accurate. And then you layer the machine learning in. So we do an awful lot of work to try to make sure that the invoice is accurate. It is a non-trivial problem, as they say.
Yeah. So how have you prioritized the evolution of MarginEdge over time?
I would say we've invested disproportionately heavily in product for our size as a business, for sure. So we have steadily invested in product, and just this last July, we had our board meeting and everybody is talking about the importance of cash flow break even and all of these things. But I made a proposal to the board that I wanted to increase dev spend 40% to do a lot of new things that I think are possible, and they gave approval with flying colors. Like, so we just we're in the process of growing our dev team from 50 to 70, because it's a big industry. There's a lot of things that we can do to help operators, and we want to invest heavily in the long term. We're not here for a quick flip.
So what does the future look like? Are you able to talk about any of the things you'd like to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so if you think about what MarginEdge is at the highest level, there's an operating tool, right? Inventory, the actuals versus theoreticals, the recipe tracking, right? The stuff that an operator would do day to day, or a chef or a general manager. And then there's the other half, which is the accountant or finance side, which is all the budget tracking. Is your food cost 25%? Is are we spending too much on rent? And how does this, what are the profit margins, all that good stuff. And so including cash flow. So we have a payment system on top of the software that also integrates with your bank and pays the bills directly, all that stuff. So when you think about us going forward, there's a lot of work actually on both of those, right? We can help restaurants from a finance standpoint, better understanding their cash flow, better negotiating with vendors, their payment terms, better helping with just the flow of funds and all of the things involved in cash flow, which for restaurants, as you know, is very hard, particularly in a seasonal business. And then on the operating side, I think a lot of it is going to be around the machine learning and looking forward. I like to say that in MarginEdge and in most software, almost everything we do is looking backwards, right? What our claim to fame is that instead of having to wait a long time for your financials, you get them day to day, and you're seeing near real time what's going on in your restaurant. But what machine learning allows you to do is look forward. That's my next master's, actually. Yeah, and from Northwestern. But looking forward, what machine learning allows you to do is look forward. And when you look at the data set that we've got, right, we've got, I think it's $8 billion of sales data flowing through us, $4 billion in purchasing data. There's a lot of information. And so, it's all anonymous. We wouldn't tell restaurants what each other are doing, but we can anonymize that and use that to train models that'll let us help restaurants look forward instead of just backwards.
Got it. And you are collecting a massive amount of data right now with all the different restaurants. Yeah. So right now, if you invest with MarginEdge as a tool to use, you're getting access to this library of data that, if you're trying to keep track of the how do you know if the price of something changed, right? Maybe if it is that product is being used in a restaurant in the network, then I guess your system would be updated based off of the things that you order.
Yeah, the nice thing about MarginEdge is I mentioned earlier when we opened Waabi and there's 800 things we buy and all the prices are changing. With Waabi, we just know all of that. So you might not realize this, but in sushi restaurants, avocado is actually one of the number one ingredients that you use. And so when avocado prices change, we can instantaneously see what that does for every roll that uses avocado, right? So we know what our food cost is across the board and what it should be, and the same with any of the ingredients. And so, yeah, it's giving you a level of visibility that, historically a lot of restaurants would do their food costs once every 6 months, once every 3 months, once a year, updating their menus and updating all the prices. And now it's just live. It also will let you see seasonality, so you can literally click on a recipe and see over time what those prices changed. And so if an avocado roll is going to be particularly expensive for you in the summers,
right,
don't put it on the conveyor belt.
Right,
Put something else on the conveyor belt.
Right. The list of, so just kind of summarize what Margin is today. It started with data entry with invoices. It evolved to updates pricing on your inventory sheets.
Yep.
Updates your ordering sheets.
Yep.
Keeps your recipes prepped and plated.
Yep.
Prices up to date with real-time kitchen recipe viewer.
Yep.
What is that exactly?
Yeah, that's kind of cool. We built this actually in collaboration with a large restaurant group here locally, Clyde's, and their executive chef, Steve Lyons, who is a wonderful guy to work with. So Steven and I and our team basically Steven said, look, we're going to roll out MarginEdge, but I don't want to have a recipe book that I print in my kitchen and have separately your application that I'm updating recipes in. I want it all to be real time and the same thing, right? And so basically we built this application where you can take Amazon Kindle or an iPad or any screen like that, and log into a different version of MarginEdge that is designed just to be in the kitchen. So it has no pricing information. It doesn't have anything about like the accounting or whatever. But
just recipes and
it looks
portions.
like a recipe guide. But what's brilliant about it is that it's all drill downable, right? So when you're looking at your crab cake entree, you can click on the French fries and you can click on the crab cake. You can click down to any of the ingredients. It takes allergen information also and rolls that up. So if you put one at the host station, if somebody wants to ask about allergens, you can answer those questions. And it's really kitchen specific in that it
scalability with recipes and stuff.
Scalability with recipes, but also down to what instruments to use. You can take pictures of different instruments in the kitchen and say, use this thing for this part. And
it's almost like a training tool for like how to.
Yeah,
what do you mean by instruments?
It's not like I wouldn't call it a learning management system because that was my first business, and I know those are a little more elaborate. But it will on the recipe allow you to if it says I don't know, this is a stupid example, but use one tray of whatever. You can click on the tray and see the picture of the tray. That was a terrible example, but depending on what instruments you're using in the recipe, you can actually click on those items and literally see pictures.
Instruments? Are you talking about the ingredients?
No, I mean the actual physical tools you use in the kitchen. So
like if it's a burger, the instrument would be a grill.
Yeah, but it would be.
Or a spatula?
I'm sorry that I am drawing a blank on fancier kitchen instruments. I really should be better at this, but clearly they're not showing their prep cooks a picture of a grill. It's
right.
It's the
like portioning instruments.
Yeah.
So like if you're scooping, you're trying to standardize portion control.
Yeah.
Like you use this ladle.
I have slaughtered this. Yes.
No. I'm happy that I can come in and talk the language and help out. So
I am clearly not a chef.
But I mean, I would see the practical use of a tool like this is, say, if you have a big catering order and it came in and it's for like tomorrow, and you're
so
how many people are we making pizza for?
Yeah, his use case, one of the restaurants the Clydes Group owns is Old Ebbitt Grill, which is one of the top 5 grossing restaurants in the country. They publish their numbers, so I'm not telling any secrets. They do over $40 million a year in sales out of one restaurant. It's the oldest restaurant in DC. No, seated. Like just.
But do they do catering? Is that included?
I don't think they do catering.
Wow.
It's
How
just
many seats?
It's just a beast of a restaurant. I'm not sure actually, but it's just an institution in DC. It's been there forever. But it's obviously a very high volume place. It's busy 7 days a week, and he wanted the kitchen to be efficient. He wanted to have everybody running off of one thing. He didn't want outdated, pages floating around where somebody's got the old recipe for crab cake, right? When that crab cake recipe gets updated, he wants it updated at all stores, at all restaurants at the same time. So that's the kitchen display use.
So that covers again keeps your recipes prepped and plated, prices.
Correct.
Yeah, that's what I said before. Prices up to date with real-time kitchen recipe reviewer. Alerts you if the prices of key ingredients jump. I love that feature right there.
Yeah, and particularly if you're doing bigger restaurant groups that have negotiated pricing, they can load that price sheet into MarginEdge, and then anytime something comes in that's above the price that was negotiated, they'll get a flag so they can make sure that they're keeping their vendors on board.
Yeah, and I'll echo again, determines the theoretical food and beverage cost over usage versus actual, and the enterprise solution versus best in class. So that's actually something that I wanted to talk about on my note right there.
Okay.
So one of the big conversations that we have, in the conversations I have at Restaurant Unstoppable Network is what is right for you. Seems like right now, if you're opening a restaurant, there's 2 paths to take. There's enterprise solution, one-stop shop, everything under one umbrella, versus the best in the class path. And to me, it seems like I sometimes I'm like, which path do I consult on? Or I don't look at myself as a consultant, but how do you know which path to take? Which path is right for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think
because just to verify so the viewers or the listeners understand, you are best in class for what you do.
Correct.
MarginEdge is considered best in class. Correct. When it comes to what is the actual key term that you use?
Restaurant management system.
Restaurant management system. Yeah. So I guess let me ask you this. What makes you best in class first? And then we'll go to best in class versus enterprise solution. Sure.
I mean, I think, we have spent a lot of money on software development in this specific business, and so I clearly that's a big part of it, but fundamentally I think it is starting from those early days of People who really genuinely understand restaurant operations, building the product from the ground up to be something that meets our needs. I mean, it is very easy, or it is very common, I should say, for people to come into the restaurant industry that are technologists from outside that have not spent a lot of time in a restaurant and frankly think restaurateurs aren't smart because they are not technologists and look down on them and build something because they think they're geniuses and try to sell it to the restaurateur only to realize that actually the restaurateur knows a lot of things you don't know. Right. And this thing doesn't actually meet all of the needs. Yeah. I mean, that was one of my biggest pet peeves when I was operating restaurants for 10 years is, I'd get a call from a 27-year-old that was like, hey, we've got the greatest thing, that this technology that's going to make your life so much easier. And they'd walk you through it and you'd realize they just have no idea what they're doing. So I think the heart of it is that we really do genuinely understand, and we've built a product around that. I think this idea that we are trying to remove as much work as possible but provide the transparency is the heart of it. And then, obviously there's a bunch of features, but I think that's the baseline.
Right. So back to that question, enterprise solution versus best in class. Like, for me, what I've come to realize is I don't think there's any two scenarios or restaurateurs that are exactly the same. Some people I think are better at looking at the best in class approach, and they want the best in class for everything. Sure. They're good at sewing it together, and they're passionate about technology, and that excites them. It's the part of the industry that they love. Yeah. And they like constantly hunting for the next best thing that will help their restaurant be shave a percent off here or there, and that's their jam. Yeah. And then there's the other path, which is maybe you're not so much into staying plugged into the tech side of the industry, and you just want a solution that is a one and stop, one and done.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reality is the one-stop shops can solve a lot of needs, but it really depends on, like you said, the business and trying to understand the difference between the marketing and the reality. And this is where a lot of this stuff melts down. Like, there are several companies that will tell you they are the operating system of restaurants that do different things, like literally completely different things. And so, well, which one is the operating system if they do completely different things, right? So like Toast and Restaurant 365 both claim to be a one-stop shop that are the operating system for the restaurant, but they literally do completely different things. So like there's a lot of what different companies do that overlap, and a lot of words that are the same, which is really confusing. Like, online ordering, for example, right? Like online ordering can mean a lot of different things through a lot of different channels. And when we say we have ordering, what we mean is ordering from your vendor, right? So like Olo has nothing to do with us, like a zero. But if you look on our websites, we both talk about online ordering, right? So like getting past just a list of words that people say they do and really understanding what's different about them, I think really matters. And I think when that happens, some of that best of breed versus best of class breaks down, because I think we do things that other people simply don't do.
Yeah. What are some of the companies out there that you think complement what you do really well? Like, if I'm listening to this and I'm about to open a restaurant and I'm looking through the suite of tools I could invest in, and if we're leaning in the direction of best in class and that appeals to us, like, what complements?
Well, I'll say two things. I'm going to give you specific software companies in a second, but before I say that, I'll say one thing that I believe is very important, and it matters in this best of breed versus operating system, or whatever you want to call it, world, is how open the platforms you choose are. And so, not to call them out, but Toast is literally, we integrate with 50 point of sale systems. Toast is literally the only one that charges for your data. So like every other point of sale we integrate with, we can connect to them, we can pull in your data, we can plug it in, and you can run with it. But when we do it with Toast, you have to pay an additional fee. And guess what? You have to pay us an additional fee because they charge us, and you have to pay Toast an additional fee, right? Like, so I don't know. Toast has lots of strong things.
Is that on top of the $1?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I mean, CFO just got fired for.
Yeah, and they say that they need to monetize. More power to them. But if you're going to charge people for their own data, I'm not sure you're in the right spot for the long term. I think that's tough. And so So first, I would say, as you look at solutions, look for open solutions, right? Look for solutions that, maybe you want to use everything they have, but if you decide later you want to plug something in, they're not going to nickel and dime you when you try to do these things, or worse, not let other people plug in at all. So, so I'd say that first. As far as particular companies, we're big fans of 7 Shifts. So we are back of house, and so we're all of your purchasing, and we're 30 or 40% of your spend. 7 Shifts is your other 30%, right? They're all of your labor scheduling. We integrate nicely with 7 Shifts, so their data will flow into us and vice versa.
I know that's a platform that's looking to evolve beyond labor management.
Yeah, they're moving into kind of like we are, in the sense that they're moving into the accounting side. They're moving into the payroll. They're moving into tip management. They're moving into some of the things that
HR.
Yeah, exactly. They're moving into the things that are what you would call back of house, like using the same words again, but totally different than what we're doing, right? We're back of house kitchen, they're back of house scheduling and HR and that kind of stuff. So no overlap at all in our feature sets. We also like them a lot culturally.
They're a great company.
Yeah.
Past sponsor of the show as well.
Oh, are they?
Yeah. Nothing but great things to say about them. Honestly, any company that's ever worked with Restaurant Unstoppable, I'm super grateful. I mean, lots of great companies out there, but like you, nothing but awesome things to say about that organization.
Yeah. And then on the POS side, we've got a really close relationship with Touch Bistro. That's the one that we're probably closest to, although we do integrate with a bunch, including Toast and others. Those are the ones that come to mind immediately.
So on the terms of somebody who, you're a tech CEO in the restaurant industry, so I'm sure that you're thinking about getting your master's, or are you committed to going back to school to become a...
No, I finished my second master's. Yeah, I did it out of Northwestern.
So that was the future, not the future, but what's the...
Artificial intelligence. Machine learning, yeah.
That's a huge subject right now. Artificial intelligence, machine learning.
I tell people it might be the most quickly outdated degree ever earned on Earth. I got it in 2021, and things have already evolved so much.
Well, I feel like, is that not the future? This world where robotics combine, what do they call it? The slingshot effect, where robotics slingshot into AI and machine learning. What does that mean? When those three things come together.
Yeah, I mean, I think machine learning was the future before all of the latest buzz with LLMs in the last year. I mean, I think people don't realize how much machine learning is already in their life. Every time you look at your phone, it recognizes your face, right? That's machine learning. Machine learning is all around you already, and will continue to be more and more. As far as the robotics, I don't know. I mean, the stuff going on in San Francisco is cool. I mean, they just launched, Waymo just launched their cars in DC and is driving around and mapping it out. I can't wait to get my self-driving car.
Is doing it, right? Yeah. You can order, I know it's not universally wherever there's Domino's, but there's some spots across the country right now
that are doing driverless.
Yeah.
I mean, look, my sushi restaurant has a lot of sushi robots. If you Google sushi robots, they're machines that do everything from rice cooking to mixing to nigiri and maki. And they've been around for 30 years. They're not new. They don't need artificial intelligence. So yeah, I think there's a lot more coming for sure. And it's a fascinating space.
So you said you're never opening another restaurant.
No, sir.
If you were, where's your mind? What are you doing to be ready for the future, the restaurant of the future?
I would like to support the restaurant of the future. I don't know that I want to own it.
But as somebody who's an expert in the future as a technology CEO in the restaurant industry.
Look, I think honestly, my belief is that you're going to continue to see the bifurcation of two very different concepts, right? You've got the fast casual and the full service. And so in fast casual, I think you're going to continue to see this move towards what I just did today for lunch, which was in this case Chopped. They've got a phenomenal app.
Right
their stores, their stores across the street. I literally from my desk hit reorder, go get on the elevator, go down, walk across the street. It's right there on the shelf. I grab it. I'm eating it as I walk back to my office, right? That is fast casual. I don't prepare food. I'm not going to make my own lunch. That's how I'm going to eat. And so certainly I think in the fast casual space, we're going to see more and more and more of that, just sort of automation, convenience, food at your ready. And that's great. But I think there is an absolute permanent and long-term and large space for full service, everything from from casual full service to fine dining, where it is experiential. You're there for the architecture, you're there for the service, you're there for the food, there for the ambiance, you're there to get the hell out of your house.
The relationships.
I mean,
I think that's one of the most undervalued aspects of what you offer your consumer is Danny Myers talks about hiring 51%ers, the people that are the socially, emotionally intelligent individuals who are the people you want to see, the people like that that exist
give you
to
energy.
Serve, that, exactly.
If you look at I'm a macroeconomics guy. If you look at countries' development paths, as they get richer, they spend more money on two things: healthcare and entertainment. It's just the reality. As anyone moves up the ladder, that's what you want. You want to live longer and healthier, and you want to go out and have a good time. And so I just think that the full service stuff, honestly, I think has overcorrected on technology. I think we've gone too far into the QR codes and pay at table and trying to make full service more like fast casual. And there are some concepts that's fine because they're primarily, in and out kinds of places. But I think the restaurants that are successful are the ones that are going to keep to their roots.
Yeah. I see the future being much more dynamic in the sense that it's not just one option. Like I think Olo is a great example of this. Olo, they are trying to give the consumer the option. Yes, you can go sit down. You can choose to engage with the server. You can let the server take your order, deliver your food, bring the check. Or if you need to get out of there because, I'm here waiting for my car to get finished at the shop, and I thought I would have an hour and a half. Oh crap! It did it in an hour. Like let's get out of here.
Sure.
Or whatever reason that you could, the infinite amount of reasons that could come up that you might want to leave early.
Right.
The babysitter feels like they might be getting sick. You know what I mean? Like whatever it might be. You gotta go. You have that option. And sometimes people just want the option to be able to go. Sometimes the server forgets. And when the server forgets, you're not trapping the guests, and they can be like, I think they forgot. Like, let's just get out of here.
Yeah.
So
that's true. My Saturday night, I was a little frustrated that it took a while to get out. But no, I think that's right. But I do think there's so much talk about technology and how it's going to change everything. And I think that's certainly true to a certain extent. But I think sometimes we also overcorrect on it and don't realize that we like the human connection.
Well, it's weird. It's weird because it's like a lot of it is like, we're overcorrecting because we think this is where the industry is headed, but at the same time, we can't find anybody to operate the traditional.
That's true.
So like they're being forced.
Yeah. That's definitely true.
So I don't have the answers. I'm not here to provide the answers. This is my research. I am looking for answers right now. So I mean, it's cool to get your perspective. I agree with you that I think that the old way of doing things isn't necessarily going anywhere. I think that the industry is just going to fragment, and there's going to be more options for the consumer because there's a lot of different types of people out there, and everybody has different needs.
Sure, and even where you place the restaurants, right? They're completely different things.
Right. Is there anything we haven't discussed up to this point in the terms of like where we're headed as far as the industry of restaurants, what you're doing to be a part of the future, things we should just know about MarginEdge in general? News. I don't know that I've got any exciting news. I wish I had something to drop for you. I mean, I do think one of the things I mentioned earlier, that separates us is our strong knowledge of the restaurant business, but it's not just Roy and I, when we started it, we have leaned really heavily into making sure that we're connecting. And so we currently have a sales team of about 40 or 45 people, and every single one of them has been an operator. Every single one of them. We do not hire technology salespeople and try to teach them about restaurants. We hire restaurant operaters and teach them about we are always hiring. Yes, we are definitely hiring, actually. We're now at 200 people and growing. We're growing almost 100% year over year. You bring up a really interesting point, something that I've noticed and that I don't think is this industry is incredible for spurring opportunity.
Yeah. For sure.
Not only does it create market, because I mean we're in the business of feeding people, and not just feeding people, but it's just so much more than that. Like all the satellite things that this industry creates opportunity for other industry. It's so exciting.
No, and what I love about the industry more than anything is the number of people who can get into it from all different walks of life, and that there is no, did you go to this school or that school or where were you born or any of that. It is if you can do the work, you can move up, and I have the utmost respect for everyone in the industry, having struggled through it myself. I know how hard it is.
But on that note of moving up, there's so much opportunity. Because it's not I think you can, the entry level is working in the industry, but if you get that industry experience, if you work 5 to 10 years in the industry and you know the language, you understand the restaurant owner, you understand the people in the industry, there is so much opportunity for you beyond the restaurant, the four walls of the restaurant.
People don't realize it's an $800 billion a year industry. I mean, it's huge. It's bigger than the airline industry, right?
And not anybody can roll into this. Whether it's working for MarginEdge or another company, that they can't speak the language. They can't relate to their target market.
Sure.
Sorry, did I cut you short?
No, I'm agreeing with you. Yeah.
So this has been a lot of fun.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. This is fun.
I appreciate your time. I appreciate your support. MarginEdge has been sponsoring the podcast now for, I want to say, at least 3 or 4 years. I want to say the first conversations back to 2018, just around the time you said that you're trying to get the word out there.
Just coming out. That's right. We hired our first salesperson in mid-18.
Yeah. So you're doing great work.
Thank you.
This conversation is well overdue.
Thanks for all your support.
Oh, of course, man. The feeling's mutual. So if we've been listening to today's conversation, we've been interested in MarginEdge, and if we were on the fence, we're ready to get off the fence. What's the best way to connect?
Just marginedge.com. We won't let you go once you're there. You can fill out a form and we'll have somebody contact you. And the best part about it is it will be somebody who understands the business.
I'm going to throw a little extra on there. marginedge.com/unstoppable.
Oh, there you go.
Make sure that you tell them you came
That's
from
the
here.
only website. Yeah. marginedge.com unstoppable.
/unstoppable. So please use our links. It shows our sponsors that people are listening and paying attention. And one question I like to ask all my guests is, who do you respect and admire in the industries? Maybe some of your operators who you're just like, whoa, these people have it dialed in. They have it figured out. They are mavericks of the industry. They have something to share. Who is that for you?
Yeah, I find the question a little hard to answer because I know so many restaurateurs, and so I don't want to step on any toes. I will say one of our very early clients was a gentleman by the name of Tony Stafford, who has 3 restaurants in this area and is what I have always referred to as a restaurateur's restaurateur. He grew up in the industry. He knows it. He gets it. He has 3 very successful places, and he lives it, and he breathes it. And if there's a mistake in MarginEdge, he will call my cell phone on Saturday night, and he is not afraid, right?
What's the name of his restaurant group?
Ford's Fish Shack. It's 3 restaurants locally. Tony Stafford, great guy. But I will tell you, the person in business that I've dealt with that I admire the most is a gentleman by the name of Nigel Morris, who was a co-founder of Capital One. He's a local investor and does a lot in the fintech space, and is one of these people that has proven to me that you can be both successful and a nice person, a genuinely good person. They don't, you hear all the time that people who are wildly successful are all, whatever. But he's wildly successful. Again, Capital One co-founder and successful since then. But has just been a wonderful person.
If I did get him on the show.
Yeah, you're not going to get him.
I was going to say, if I did get him on the show.
Sorry.
What's the angle there?
For the show?
I know Capital One's in
he's been out of
the
Capital One.
industry.
Yeah, he's been out of Capital One now for 15 years. He runs a investment firm called QED Investors, and focuses in the fintech space. And so his primary area is fintech. Yeah, it's a different segment.
Making notes, fintech, but I mean it's interesting because fintech is starting to get involved more and more with the restaurant industry.
Sure. That's how we got contacted with them, because we do the payment side of this business. And so there's definitely more and more.
Think of Mainvest right now, which is doing some cool stuff. That's really interesting. Actually, at one point I thought it'd be cool to connect the two of you guys. Because you said you're looking to get more into the financial side.
Yeah,
of things.
Please do.
There's another company out of Atlanta. It's all about just crowdsourcing, money for scale.
Sure.
But doing it in a way that helps connect the consumer with brands that they want to invest in.
Yeah, I think I have heard of that. That is cool. Yeah, that's really nice. So you get to basically be a subscriber to the restaurant that's opening that you're going to eat at locally, and that helps fund them. Yeah, so I love that model.
The challenge is if you're a local restaurant trying to get local financing, there was never any framework that existed to put you in front of local investors. Right. It was all out all over the place. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create the framework for local people to invest in local restaurants. And what ends up happening is you have all these local people who then promote you locally.
Yeah, of course.
They're invested.
Yeah.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful model. Yeah. I love it. I think that combined with some just, help with negotiating leases and investment documents and stuff just to help people get started who maybe don't have that background could be wildly valuable.
Bo, this has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
One more time, head over to marginedge.com/unstoppable. If you are interested in MarginEdge, please use that link. It shows them that people are listening and it supports the show. And thank you for all of your support, and thank you for taking the time to be a guest to share your story beyond MarginEdge.
Of course,
and
enjoyed
what you've learned, man. There is no question. You are unstoppable. Cheers.
Thanks.